The real-life RMS Titanic sunk in the Atlantic Ocean on April 15, 1912, after hitting an iceberg during its maiden voyage to New York City. Over 2,000 passengers were on the ship, many of whom were depicted in the film. Molly Brown? A real person who was actually known as the Unsinkable Molly Brown, and Mr. Andrews, the real builder of the ship, just like Captain Edward John Smith was the real captain. The majority of Titanic's characters actually have real-life counterparts, many of whom sadly died on board, and some of whom lived to tell the tale of the ship's tragic sinking. Though Jack and Rose were completely invented, the stories of the real people on board the Titanic are so interesting they could easily make up their own 3-hour movie. Let's see, 19 real-life passengers featured on screen, along with their Hollywood counterparts. Number 1. Margaret Brown. Kathy Bates played Margaret Brown, commonly known as the Unsinkable Molly Brown. She earned her nickname because she urged the crewmen in charge of her lifeboat to go back and rescue more passengers. Number 2. Captain Edward Smith. Bernard Hill, who also played Theoden in The Lord of the Rings, played Edward James Smith, who captained the Titanic and died when the ship sank. He was survived by his wife and their daughter. Number 3. J. Bruce Ismay Joseph. Bruce Ismay, played by Jonathan Hyde, was the chairman and managing director, White Star Line. He survived the sinking of Titanic and later testified before the U.S. Senate in an inquiry about the disaster. In the days after the sinking, the press harshly criticized him for saving himself, while women and children were still aboard the ship. Number 4. John Jacob Astor IV. John Jacob Astor IV, played by Eric Braeden, was not only the richest passenger on the Titanic, but was also one of the richest men in the world at the time of the sinking. His body, which was eventually recovered, was identified by initials sewn into his jacket. Number 5. Madeleine Force. Madeleine Force was John Jacob Astor IV's second wife, played by Charlotte Chatton. As depicted in the movie, she was pregnant at the time of the Titanic voyage. She and her husband were on their way back to America, so the baby would be born there. She survived the sinking and gave birth 4 months later. Number 6. Cosmo Duff-Gordon. Played by Martin Jarvis, Cosmo Duff-Gordon was an Olympic silver medalist in fencing who survived the sinking. Like Bruce Ismay, he drew criticism for seeming to violate the women and children first rule established by White Star crew. He died in 1931 at age 68. Number 7. Lucy, Lady Duff-Gordon, played by Rosalind Ayres, the real-life wife of Martin Jarvis. Lady Duff-Gordon was the wife of Cosmo Duff-Gordon, and as Rose mentions in Titanic, she was a fashion designer. She did not, however, only design lingerie, and she also wrote fashion columns for magazines like Harper's Bazaar and Good Housekeeping. Number 8. Benjamin Guggenheim. Benjamin Guggenheim, played by Michael Ensign in Titanic, was a wealthy American businessman who boarded the ship with his mistress, Leontine Obart. He died during the sinking with his valet, Victor Giglio. His brother, Solomon Guggenheim, is the Guggenheim whose name is on the Guggenheim in NYC. Number 9, Noel Leslie, Countess of Rhodes. Though she's barely in the movie, the Countess of Rhodes, played by Rochelle Rose, was actually a heroine of the Titanic disaster. She helped steer her lifeboat away from the sinking ship and then to the rescue ship. She was also mentioned in Downton Abbey as being someone that the Crawleys had seen shortly before the sinking. Number 10, Thomas Andrews, played by Victor Garber. Thomas Andrews was the shipbuilder in charge of building Titanic. As depicted in the movie, the real Andrews handed out life jackets and tried to help as many people as possible get to safety. He died when the ship sank and was survived by his wife and their daughter. Number 11, William Murdoch, played by Ewan Stewart. William Murdoch served as first officer on the Titanic. The movie shows Murdoch dying by suicide after the ship hits the iceberg, but whether the real Murdoch did so is a matter of debate. After the release of Titanic, Murdoch's family demanded an apology from James Cameron and 20th Century Fox for the portrayal of their relative. Number 12, Frederick Fleet. Frederick Fleet, played by Scott Anderson, was the lookout who spotted the iceberg that Titanic hit. As depicted in the movie, he really did shout "iceberg right ahead" when he saw it. Fleet survived the sinking and served in World War I and World War II. He died by suicide in 1965. Number 13, Jack Phillips, portrayed by Gregory Cook. John "Jack" Phillips was the senior wireless operator on board the Titanic who sent out the distress call after the ship struck the iceberg. He died when the ship sank. Number 14, Harold Bride. Harold Bride, played by Craig Kelly, was the junior wireless operator on board Titanic. He did survive the sinking and testified during the Senate inquiry about it. Number 15, Charles Lightoller, played by Jonathan Phillips. Charles Lightoller served as second officer on the Titanic. He survived the sinking and continued to work for White Star Line, and later served in World War I. During World War II, he used his private yacht to assist with the evacuation of Dunkirk. Mark Rylance's character arc in the 2017 movie Dunkirk closely mirrors Lightoller's story. Number 16, Henry Wilde, played by Mark Lindsay Chapman. Henry Wilde was the chief officer on the ship and served on several White Star ships before working his way up to his position on the Titanic. He died during the sinking. Number 17, Ida and Isidor Straus. Isidor Straus, played by Lou Poulter, was the co-owner of Macy's department store. He married his wife Ida, played by Elsa Raven, in 1871. Ida reportedly refused to board a lifeboat upon finding out that her husband could not board one, and they both died in the sinking. Number 18, Colonel Archibald Gracie IV. There aren't many photos of Colonel Archibald Gracie IV available, but he was played by Bernard Fox in Titanic's infamous dinner scene. In real life, the colonel survived the ship's sinking by climbing on top of an overturned lifeboat. Number 19, Wallace Henry Hartley. One of the most moving scenes from Titanic is when the band continues playing to calm panicking passengers. Violinist Wallace Henry Hartley, played by Jonathan Evans-Jones, really did lead his 8-member band as the Titanic sunk and tragically died in the process.